We're going to have the second part of our panel discussion today, and we're going to start with a piece that was created by WNET, celebrating, I think, their 50th anniversary also. My name is Marcos Dimas. I am the executive director of the Puerto Rican Workshop, and I was also a member of the Realidades team. So we're going to start with that, and then we'll have the panel discussion. Willie, run it.
Okay.
I don't know. That's ridiculous. That's old ass shit. This is 1971, man.
Channel 13 first went on the air on September 16, 1962. By the turn of the decade, the station had earned a reputation for being daring and innovative in defining what public television could and should be. On October 5, 1970, the very same day that PBS began broadcasting nationwide, 13 joined forces with National Educational Television, creating a powerful flagship station in the country's largest media market. The merger brought both the new call letters, WNET, and an influx of funding that would allow for experimentation on an unprecedented scale.
There was this hunger in the country for quality television, and it was the small cadre of committed people at WNET who kept this station on. It was a ferment. It was an excitement. They were like sailors coming home from the war who'd been denied companionship for a long time.
Channel 13 was also innovative when it came to giving a voice to America's growing Latino community. In 1972, 13 launched Realidades, Spanish for Realidades. Community activist Humberto Cintron became its host and executive producer.
La población latina de los Estados Unidos encuentra que la brecha que existe entre el sueño.
It was the first national Latino public television series in the history of television in the United States. We did a national ascertainment, and we asked the Puerto Rican, Latino, Chicano, Mexican, Latin American community in as many cities as we could get what they wanted to see. They told us what they wanted to see, and we showed it to them. We talked about all the issues that were important: employment, racism, politics, everything.
Constantemente se toman pasos para eliminar la injusticia de colocar a los niños latinos en clases para retardados.
In my opinion, it's very necessary to have people who work in this hospital or in any hospital in this community to speak Spanish and English together.
We knew immediately that if it was going to be a Latino show and if it was going to address our community, it had to be bilingual, because such a large part of our community is only Spanish-speaking.
Not only was the show bilingual, but its Latino staff had total control of the creative content.
We were innovators, and we trained a lot of folks to continue the process of developing Latino programming for public television.
Realidades was indeed groundbreaking, but it wasn't the first show to bring Spanish to Channel 13. 2 years after its launch, in 1969, Sesame Street had expanded its cast to include Latinos.
Buenos días, señor McIntosh. Good morning, Luis. ¿Qué tal?
Introducing the characters of Luis Rodriguez and Maria Figueroa to a world that was eager to hear what they had to say.
El rótulo y que tenía que decir cerrado.
Maria and Luis were the vanguard of Latinos in public television.
The star, man.
Okay. Hi, Cookie.
What are you talking about?
They were an inspiration to many children around the country, just having them there, just being there.
Let me try. It's good, but it needs a little bit of sofrito.
Algo de salsa, ¿verdad? Sí.
You may not understand this.
That was it, yeah. And I think that's a good segue to what we're going to be talking about. When Cookie Monster, or whoever that was, says, me no understand this. So we're still in the same position. They don't understand us. But at the offset, to do the demonstrations that eventually became the catalyst for Realidades becoming a reality, and a program going on the network. Maximo Colon and I told him to concentrate on the photographs that he took between, not all, but of course, this is a selection of his photographs, because Max has been a photographer since the late 60s. But he concentrated on photographs that were taken between 1971 and 1977, which is the actual period that Realidades was on TV. Realidades started as a local program, and then I think 2 or 3 years after that it became a national program. I also concentrated on our archives, which includes posters of events and political and cultural events that happened also during that time, and that's in the second gallery. And then on the third gallery we have more photographs, articles, and there's some articles here, one by Blanca Vazquez, who's right here, and another one by Lilian Jimenez. And there's a very good article by Richie Perez talking about the image of Puerto Ricans in the media. So this is basically the amount of work that's being shown in this exhibition. The exhibition is going to go on till August 4th, which is next Saturday, a week from today. So anyway, so we're going to start the panel discussion, I guess, right? And we got Humberto Cintron, who's going to come up here and take the first seat. No, okay, take the middle. And we got Blanca Vazquez. Sit down. We got Lilian Jimenez, who also participated in the last panel, but I was thinking of them participating in this panel. But anyway, they're here. I got Raquel Ortiz, who was a producer at Realidades, and she's one of the people who maintained herself doing production, and she's been producing out of Boston and other places, right? Yeah. Okay. And you got Joe Falcon. Joe Falcon was another community activist who participated in a lot of demonstrations, and he also did the music for one of my pieces, for one of the films that I produced for Realidades. Joe Falcon and Conjunto Unión were the authors and produced and performed. So without further ado, I think we'll start. Oh, let me say something before we start. Oh no, as part of this, I came about my involvement with this. I was part of Taller Boricua. Taller Boricua was then on 2nd Avenue between 110 and 111th Street. And Jose Garcia was the filmmaker who did a pilot project for a program in Realidades, and then it was a bit too political, and the station didn't want it. So then Jose Garcia motivated the troops. He got Taller Boricua, he got community news. He got El Comité on the west side and all these people to participate in demonstrating. We started the demonstrations. We did all the placards at Taller Boricua. We wrote up all the placards, and we demonstrated. We got Perry Thomas involved. We got everybody involved, and we eventually started taking over when they were doing their programs. We would bust in and take over. And so, we put a lot of pressure on them, and eventually they exceeded and gave us the program Realidades. That's the nucleus of it. So last time we talked about the political implications and all that, and I want to try to start with getting Raquel and Humberto and myself and Blanca and anybody else who's willing to talk about the actual experiences that during the programming and the actual implementation, because you got to figure that nobody knew anything about the media then. When I went in, I was able to go to the WNET Film and Television School. And I graduated from there. When I graduated from the Film and Television School, then I went to work for Realidades. So I didn't know anything about film, and most of these people didn't. I mean, so you want to start?
I just wanted to add something, which actually just has to do with how I got involved. Because I started working at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is the major funding arm of PBS and NPR and all that other kind of stuff. But back then, in '68, we were babies, I had been there 2 years, and I was the only Latina there. And all of a sudden, Ward Chamberlain calls and asks me if I would facilitate a conversation between the Puerto Rican Hispanic community and the president of Channel 13, which was Jay Islin. And I said to him, well, I don't know. That's not a good idea. I don't know enough about public broadcasting. We're all just starting. But long story short, that's how I got involved in it. And I did facilitate those conversations. It should have been Humberto, but they didn't want Humberto because he was too political, so they wanted somebody neutral. But I got all the questions from him anyway. And that's how we started. And I, too, ended up deciding this is what I really want to be doing, and I ended up going to the WNET Film and Television Training School. So we were in the same class. Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say about the political stuff, because I think you did that already. So. Somebody?
Anybody?
Well, you should go on, though.
Yeah, you should go on. Some of the stories and the experiences that you had.
Well, I think I have 3 stories, and I'll share 2 with you. One of them is that there's a place called the Caption Center at WGBH TV in Boston, which is also the PBS station. And they learned how to do subtitles from when I went there to produce for them, because I started a series called La Plaza, and it had to be bilingual. But doing captions in those days was a very complicated process, which they have learned how to technologize. And so it would be that we would tape the programs, and we'd do the audio, and then at the time, I was the secretary for Humberto and for the series. We would transcribe that, then we would break it up into captions, then we would translate it, and then we would have to lay it in, as we say in the business, one caption at a time, so that it would fit with whatever was being said in the program. That design was really done by Pablo Cabrera and me and Mercedes Sabio, who was also an intern and became a producer. And she had the best expertise of the Spanish language amongst all of us, right? And I typed my fingers to the bone. But that's one story that came out of that. And now the Caption Center is a national and international entity, and they learned it all from what I taught them, from what I learned with Pablo Cabrera. So, television back then was very, very different than it is now. And then I eventually got to produce a couple of programs, and my first program was about a documentary based on a book called Your Money or Your Life. And the title scared the living hell out of me, the living shit out of me, quite frankly. And so I read the book, and I thought, we got to do something about this. And it basically was talking about the fact that only 1% of the medical professionals, which is the doctors who actually see patients, because, you know, there are scientists and biologists and all that other kind of stuff, were women. And, you know, that less than 1% of the Latino population or the Black population or whatever were getting services. And so that was my first documentary, and I can't believe they gave me the permission to do it, but that's what we did in those days, because we were all learning and all growing and didn't really know much. But my favorite story comes years later when we were doing Angelitos Negros. And that was developed by Lou de Lemos and Livia Perez, and it was basically a dance performance of the story of Angelitos Negros, which in essence is when a child dies before they're 7, you have to have a special ritual so that they absolutely get to heaven, right? And so that story was a written story, and then there was this album, and they combined all of that. And then we got it to go under the Dance in America series. And we got the proposal, and it was written, and it was approved, and it was ready to go, and we finished the program, and then they said to us that it wasn't going to go on the air. So it was decided that that couldn't be the case, and so we devised a way to get in a lot of trouble, which we didn't really get into too much trouble, but Pancho devised a way where we would take the tapes from where you store the tapes in the television room, okay? And when you produce the tapes and they're finished, they go into a lockbox, and the only people who have access to them are the people who actually put them on the machines that put them on the air. And so we parceled out 1 tape per person, and the only people who knew who had those tapes was Pancho and me. And we took them home. And then I'll let Pancho take it from there.
I forgot. I was never involved in anything.
I plead the fifth.
Yeah, fifth. Let me see, how much is a fifth? 1, 2. Anyway, we had a lot of fun. We did what we had to do because we weren't supposed to do it. But when we found out we weren't supposed to do it, we did it. So, and that was chapter and verse of all of Realidades. We went to the community and we asked them, what do you want to do with this TV program that we now have the access to? It was called an ascertainment project. And we learned that that's what all television stations are supposed to do with their public affairs programming. Not what they want to do, but what their audience wants to do. So we went to the audience, which was you, me, and all kinds of other weird people all over town and across the country. And we were able to reach some Chicanos, Mexicanos, Boricuas from Chicago, from Philadelphia, from Miami, from all over the country, and we turned the show, what was presumably to be a local show from, not even from El Barrio, from the Puerto Rican community of New York, and we took it around the country, and we produced shows from every place we could, Texas, California, New Mexico, Illinois, wherever. And so, I mean, if you look at what the series turned out to be over the 6 or 7 years it was on the air, it was incredible because we touched all those communities and we heard from those communities. They would call us and tell us there's something happening in a little town called Cristal in Texas. What is Cristal? Where is Texas? And we went. And so we had shows, for example, and what Cristal was about people who took over the town, turned it into a Chicano town because the population was mostly that, and were able to name Congress people and the mayor of the town. And Cristal is probably still doing their thing, because I couldn't imagine all those Chicanos moving out of Cristal when they were able to do what they did. Anyway, so that was the fun of it, and that was the body, the life of it. Because, you know, at the time, I was running an organization called the Community News Service, and when I found out that there were things that were lacking in our community, I sent out my reporters to go out and get stories from all over the town. So they went to Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan and the Bronx and Staten Island, and started getting programs and subject matter that we would cover around Realidades, and we did, best as we could. So if you've got the nerve and the stamina to read all those articles, they'll say things about us that I never knew about. But people who were there on the ground are here tonight. So I'm going to hand it over to them. Hello? Blanca. Vazquez. Oh, Blanca.
Nobody wants to be first, second, or third.
Now you know what Realidades was about. I didn't know what I was doing. But I knew how to do this. One thing, really important. I knew how to spell TV. That was hard to learn. But once I learned it, I was able to do it.
Okay, so I'm not here as a media maker, maybe, except that this has been a very, it's been a very important event. You know, came to the last activity and realized how I met Humberto Cintrón at a demonstration. I don't remember what it was, but he tells me about the Puerto Rican Media Action and Education Council. So that's actually how I hook in. I hook in through that community arm, and that's how I knew all of this was going on. What was consistent for me was that what I was really, was then and am still now, is a news junkie. So I really kind of come through it as journalism, you know, being one of the most important things ever. And that starts with my dad was a cab driver and brought home newspapers every day because people always left them in cabs. So I grew up, even a little kid, reading all of these different newspapers in Spanish and English. And if you grew up in New York, you know that we had 8 or 9 papers a week, you know. So that's what's consistent in my life, is journalism. And of course, Humberto comes from journalism, and it was print. Right, so I see Realidades as well, video journalism. Right, I mean, it's totally consistent. So I am still doing that. I'm still doing, well, now I'm teaching, right, which is even, so what was important about the Puerto Rican Media Action Council, 2 things. And I have to say this, walking into the space, right, Channel 13, walking into Columbus Circle, and for some reason it was a very dark space, and a very quiet space, and a sort of even, right, there was a certain sort of, it wasn't like commercial places that are very, you know, full of light and action and, you know, people, whatever, running around. 13 was kind of like this elite, upper class kind of space. And for us to be walking in that space, to be having meetings there, right, to be having discussions about, oh, what kind of shows should we be doing? I mean, it was like entering spaces that we were forbidden, you know, that we never could even imagine ourselves being in, and that was like this, just a physical space, right? But then again, that's, I think the social movement was all about us being in spaces that we didn't belong. We didn't belong not only as Puerto Ricans, we didn't belong as working class people, right? So that was a real revolution, and every occupation of City University and every other space is, for me, the air always feels different, you know, when you enter a space and you actually change it. So that was one. I mean, us getting into places where supposedly they weren't made for us. And then the other thing is what this represents, right? There were 2 double media issues of Centro. This is a Central journal. I had the privilege of, talk about journalism, I eventually went to Columbia Journalism School, went to the Centro to work on an oral history project, and then started this Central Journal. So what's consistent about all of this is we have to tell our own stories. And nobody can tell our stories, not just tell our stories, but provide the analysis, right? And the counter narrative to, like, you know, we were a culture of poverty, we were poor because, right? Because we weren't up to par, right? So, and that was the important thing about Realidades. And last time we were here, you know, the documentary that they showed was the one that Realidades had done about the colonial relationship, right, and the independence issue, which was absolutely the story, obviously, that is still the story being told, right? And we'll kick in a little later. I had asked to show a little video, but I don't think this is quite the moment. But it just has to do how that struggle, those stories, is still what we're fighting for. Just two things about these issues. These two media issues are available online, kind of the books of, you know, there's still a handful of them, but if you go to centropr.org, the issues are available online, so you can actually see them, read them. I don't know if you can download them. But just two things. One is that Richie Perez, this article, From Assimilation to Annihilation, Puerto Rican Images in the Media, Richie always understood that this was, media was a really critical arena. Right, so he organized the Committee Against Fort Apache. That's kind of where all of this work comes from for him. He starts to, you know, it was a presentation, he does this analysis of the Puerto Rican image, starting with the 50s, Blackboard Jungle, you know, all that juvenile delinquency stuff, and it goes through the 80s, right? So really identifying media as an arena of struggle, right? So that's the one part. Media is still a critical arena of struggle, how we're represented. And then the other one by Lillian, which is actually really important, is, hey, we are doing this ourselves now. So it's a beginning account of the media makers, the Puerto Rican media makers, the documentarians, right, which is like one form, and then also the narrative stories, which is the other way that we tell stories about who we are. You know, and fictionalized stuff is so powerful. I mean, somebody loved documentaries all my life, but, you know, I saw the Ken Burns documentary about the Central Park 5, and then just recently saw the Anna DuVernay, right, 4-part dramatization of it on Netflix, which if you haven't seen, you have to see. I mean, even if it makes you sob throughout, but, you know, it's like we have to feel our realities, right? It's not just document, but it's also document what impact this has. So the third article here is actually mine, which actually, that's what it's about. It's really about what is the impact? How do we internalize this stuff? What does it mean, you know, that our working class parents are, you know, are never the heroes of anything, right? So again, those are all still the critical issues today. And I think the only other thing I want to say is, like, this is not just nostalgia. I mean, we can be nostalgic about it because it's pretty a glorious history that we're making reference to. I mean, our generation, I'm not just media, but as a generation, we did that everywhere. I mean, entered spaces, created organizations that still exist. You know, we really were about creating a space where space wasn't being made for us. We just made it ourselves. So, and we'll come back to what SB is constantly, you know, having conversations about, which is, so what's the relevance today? You know, what does it mean going forward? You know, our collective experience, you know, how do we turn that into something useful for people in struggle now, you know?
And I think another important piece, just because I'm good at piggybacking on what somebody else says, is that one of the distinctions of Realidades is that there was the community and there was the production people, right? And we were learning. But I did all the minutes for the Puerto Rican, you know, media and action, you know, Educational Council. So we worked with the community. We kept that piece of it alive. There was an advisory board, and they advised us throughout the entire series. It was important to make sure that we had that connection. Obviously, you can't have the whole entire community, but you had representation on a regular basis. And that's very important because I took that with me when I went to WGBH many years later, and I started the WGBH had Friends of WGBH. I started the Friends of La Plaza, but it was really a community group that would keep them in line and keep them aware of what was important and keep us aware of what's going on in the community and what do you have to pay attention to, and here's who you got to call and there's where you got to go. So in addition to doing all the work, which was, pretty lengthy because we were learning and doing simultaneously. We also went to the community meetings on a regular basis. We took the minutes, we shared the notes. We never lost that enlace, and that was critical. And that was critical then, and it's critical today.
I wanted to, I wasn't a part of Realidades. I got corralled into this at the last panel through Esperanza. And I was actually, when I walked in and I saw that article, I thought, holy cow, who wrote that? So that was a big surprise. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the response of the Puerto Rican community to the representation, our representation throughout the years. So in that article, I really advocate that you read it. 1940, there was a group of Puerto Ricans that organized against one of the newspapers because they said that we brought all these problems to the United States. And they had this incredible response from the community that was like, you have to take this back. You just have to take this back. And when I was doing research for the film on Antonia Pantoja that I did, I found all this material of people who were actually really fighting back against all of these terrible images. So, the myth about our community that we've been so passive is actually a myth. We haven't actually been passive at all. There have been organizations, all the way from El Congreso de Pueblos, organized by Helena Valentin and some of those folks who were the communists and the progressives in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. These were the folks that were doing work with the labor unions, that were doing work with the social clubs and organizing, making sure that the community had a social network, very conscious of what was being said in the newspapers. The newspapers said that we brought crime to the city, that, we were a depraved people. We had the double whammy of all of these sociologists deciding that they were going to look at us and begin to figure out this culture of poverty that we were mired in. And so our representation was just hitting us from all corners and sides. So it's really important to understand that, we've been a community that's been fighting back about those stereotypes. I want to talk a little bit about what happened after Realidades, because I wasn't involved with Realidades, but I was aware of it, and I think I joined towards the very end, the Action Coalition, because I was looking for a job in media. I had worked at the school newspaper at Manhattan Community College, and I had become a member of El Comité, so I was an activist, and really saw communication as one of the ways of really helping people to liberate themselves, right? So providing information for them. And the groundwork and the foundation that Realidades established by working with folks throughout the country, but in particular out in the West Coast, was absolutely critical, because much later on, when we founded the National Association of Latino Independent Producers, it was on the basis of that foundation and those relationships that we then formed this organization for Latino producers, which just celebrated its 20th anniversary. And what I'm hoping is that this exhibit can go to the next conference of NALIP, so that people throughout the country understand that NALIP is not the first time that Puerto Ricans and Chicanos and Mexicanos worked together in media, but that actually there was this, fundamental entity that established that. Once Realidades was started, there was a blossoming throughout the United States of media art centers. We don't have them anymore, but these centers allowed most of us who were involved in independent film, as well as those folks who were involved in public television, to be able to talk to each other, to be able to organize and really fight for more money for independent film. But it was really because of Realidades. They formed formed that foundation. So I'm always going to say, and I didn't work in Realidades. I worked, on the national level with a lot of the independent producers to get the independent television service going, to seat its board. But it was really because of this critical work that Realidades did. And so now we have, the pantheon of Latino producers who are not just producing on television, but on, web series, all kinds of digital platforms that we never envisioned. And it's really because of the work of the pioneers. And so, these folks in many ways are pioneers. And so I just wanted to say that because I think it's important for people to situate Realidades within the context of Latinos in the media. So that's it.
And then I pass it on to the next person. It's an interesting set of ladders, right? So there's Realidades, a television series, and the Puerto Rican Media Action and Educational Council that then eventually reached out to the West Coast and to the Chicanos and the Cubanos and everybody we had to reach out to, and came the National Latino Media Coalition. And then from that came a series that was distributed by the television station in California, KCET, where they would acquire programs of Hispanic nature and repackage them with a label, and that started the Latino Programming Consortium, which was started by amongst stations, and then that led, to it being formalized, and then that led to the NALIP. And it's funny because it's like a lot of seeds were planted. So I'm one of the people, not for the credit of it, but since I took the community organization to WGBH, and I served on the National Latino Media Coalition as a secretary, of course, but you keep spreading it around. Eventually I became a chair of the board, but that's not the point. The point is that we built all of these building blocks. And so sometimes when I watch television now and I see all the big names, I say, we started that. We helped make that happen, all of us.
Suavecito, suavecito, mueve tu cintura pa' aquí, pa' allá. Suavecito, suavecito, mueve tu cintura pa' aquí, pa' allá. Cuando mueva tu cintura, maná, todos quieren bailar, todos quieren gozar. Yeah, my way of getting into the movement, of the Puerto Rican movement, happened during the 60s at City College. I was looking for some kind of new expression through the music. That music was exploring breaking time, breaking with melodies, looking for some new forms. And it was at City College takeover by the students at 69, I was reminded, that I met SP and other people, and then gradually I began to, and then in the 70s, when Realidades began to ask for people to go demonstrate at the studio, well, of course I did it. I did not take my bass with me, but I was there, and with Federico, SP, and other people. So my experience by way of coming into Realidades was through music, as I thought about using music to organize. That's basically what it is, to organize and to break down stereotypes. I think so I was doing that with my bass, and then in the early 70s. I was influenced by the black movement, of course, with the music that was emerging at that time, and I joined a number of groups doing that. So by way of doing that kind of stuff is that I came into learning about myself. Now I know that I can use music to organize, and it was through SP that I began to go to activities that were used to raise money. For instance, we raised money for the defense of Pancho Cruz. We raised money for a lot of other independentistas who were arrested. In fact, Carlos Feliciano, when Carlos Feliciano was found innocent in the Bronx, I was there when that happened. Oh, that was an incredible experience. It happened around the jury came back, say innocent, around 11:30 p.m. at nighttime. Everybody was going crazy, man. I don't know at this time where Carlos Feliciano is, but I participated in his work, helping to release him and to at the same time gaining experience.
Bring the audience in. Shall we?
You want to do that thing now with the...
Can we show that just to, because it could be part, we're going to go to the audience discussion, but it could be part of what, the form.
Give me a minute to sort of warm up
Well,
Just a second. So different ways of telling stories. So we write, we do music.
So I'll give you some of my experiences with Realidades. Like I mentioned before, I started out by getting involved by doing the demonstrations, and we demonstrated and took over the studios when they were doing a fund drive, and P.D. Thomas read a paper stating our demands. And well, eventually the program got funded, and like I said before, I was able to go to the WNET Film and Television School, and that was an interesting part because, like, I applied for it and everything, but when it came time, I wasn't called. So I called, I think, Norberto. He was one of the producers at Realidades, and I talked to him. Norberto, they didn't accept me, so Norberto went and talked to Jerry Fegans, who was the director. She was a black woman, high yellow black woman, and most of the students were black. It was a black thing, and that's it. You weren't black, you didn't get in.
Yeah, it was started by Ellis Hazlett, who started the series Soul on Channel 13.
Oh, see.
We decided they needed to train blacks, and then we came in and we said, well, you're going to have to train us.
Right, exactly. So I became part of that, and I loved it. I didn't miss one day. I mean, I think I got a certificate at the end for showing up every day. I didn't miss one day. I said, this is for me. Yeah. So I graduated, and then I started working with Realidades. I started doing anything, like I would do camera work, I would do production work, I would do anything. So I worked with Lilia Paris, I worked with Lou de Lemos, I worked with whatever was happening, I would get a job, and then eventually I got to produce. So I got two producing assignments, and then I produced Towards a Collective Expression, which was a film on 6 Puerto Rican artists, which were members of Taller Boricua. That was it. And because we were all doing exceptional work, we were doing groundbreaking work in the arts. We were doing what would be called alternative work. That was an alternative arts movement that we were creating. And we had Jorge Soto, we had Fernando Sale Cruz, we had Armando Soto, we had Rafael Colon Morales, and who was no, Tito wasn't there. No, Jose Morales. Yeah, he wasn't part of the Taller. He was becoming. He was doing a residency at Taller. So, and myself. And then the second film that I did was called Mestizaje, and I produced that with Larry Vares. And Mestizaje was the question of Latino identity, so-called Latino identity in the United States. And we focused in on the Chicanos, the Cubans, and the Puerto Ricans, because those were the Latinos in those days. The Dominicans weren't here yet, the Mexicans weren't here yet, nobody was here yet. That was it, And so we treated that by asking 3 theater groups to write a play about their experiences with identity, and we filmed a Chicano theater group in Santa Barbara, California, and we filmed a Cuban group over here in New Jersey, and we filmed Teatro de la Otra Cosa with Felix Romero here in New York City. And so anyway, so those are the two pieces I did. My experience with Realidades was working wherever I could, whenever I could. Okay, so anyway, we'll go on now with that.
This is just an example of how, it's only a few minutes, by the way, just what folks are doing today, right, with media that is absolutely global, because it's internet, right? Okay. It's just short. Just, well, you've seen this probably, or maybe. All right.
500,000. Éramos 500,000. Yo nunca hablo, pero esto me sacó. No te habla el robot, te habla el boricua que vive adentro. El secretario dice que éramos 10,000. Chequéate cómo te pruebo que éramos 500,000. Saqué los videos hasta donde llegaba la gente. Chequea lo que está pasando en el presente. Me fui hasta Google y me di las calles. Te juro que estaba más lleno que en la Sanse. Saqué el área que ocupa una persona y poco a poco ubiqué todas las zonas. Si nos pones en fila llegamos a la luna. Te hablo un ingeniero que no te falla en la suma. Continuando aquí te dejo la evidencia. Chequea lo que hice con mucha paciencia. Luego saqué el área de las calles y solo sumé las principales. Aquí no cuento casas ni locales. Estoy sumando suave y con detalle. Cogí el valor del área de una persona y empecé a ubicarlos en las zonas. Poco a poco sumé un mar de gente. Ahora sí que la cosa se puso ardiente. Solo contando las calles con video. Quiero ser justo, pero aquí no hay consuelo. Solo por Norzagaray caminó 250,000. Somos tantos que se ve desde un avión. Poco a poco terminé mis cifras. Voy suavecito y sin prisa. Encontré 400,000 y todavía tengo tiza. La marcha de las motoras no las dejaron pasar, pero tranquilo, que te las voy a sumar. Todavía me faltan 2 o 3 cosas de qué hablar. Llegué a casa y prendí el televisor y ahí mismo vi otra manifestación. Vi boricuas haciendo huelga en el exterior, así que me puse a sumar y ahí al fin llegué al 500,000. Solo estoy contando un solo día, miércoles 17 es tu día. Pero quiero aclarar, solo en el viejo San Juan éramos 400,000 personas. ¿Qué tú piensas, que nos engaña? 10,000. Como soy boricua, aquí te dejo la ñapa. No estoy contando los que estaban en casa mirando la tele, todo lo que pasa. Si tú no entiendes te voy a dar la explicación. Mientras no arden los ojos, tú te puso en el poder y el pueblo te va a sacar también. Yo prefiero mi voto dárselo a Jay. Yo no soy cantante, yo nunca hablo, pero así se expresa el pueblo, hay que intentarlo. Solo me queda una cosa que decir, algo que yo nunca entendía. Es algo que mi abuela decía: boricua, tú y yo somos de raza y cría. 500,000. Éramos 500,000. Yo nunca hablo, pero esto me sacó. No te habla el robot, te habla el boricua que vive adentro. El secretario dice que éramos 10,000. Chequéate cómo te pruebo.
Qué chévere, ¿eh? ¿Cómo es? Somos muchos. That was the first massive demo, right? This is the first one. And this went out, I mean, everybody just kept sending it to everybody else because it's just so exciting. And then, of course, the second one was at least 500,000. And you know what they say, if everybody on the street, there's at least, I forget if it's...
They say a million.
What? No, for every, yeah, I mean, that was just in the San Juan, but there were demonstrations all over the island and places. Just to say that this is the way media works today, right? Sort of, and the impact is enormous, you know, just and exciting, right? Yeah, okay, that's all. I'm not the
Creative. Very creative.
We can throw it up. Where's Humberto?
Oh, any questions?
Humberto.
No questions?
Questions, answers,
Comments?
comments.
Criticism?
Group discussion. Group discussion.
Say something. I was going to say something. However, the thing is that Realidades was unique. Realidades was unique. The work was amazing. And it has so much repercussions, right? And we're still discriminated against. And the media's racist, and we're still fighting to be in spaces, right? So it's, and yes, and we're still a colony. So why do you think that's so? Because people here work directly. You know, why haven't we been able to break through?
So I was asked a long time ago, because I was doing that media advocacy on a national level. So we were independent producers that used to sit on an advisory board to the PBS board of directors. And so I was asked by the American Film Institute to moderate a panel on people of color in Hollywood. And Paul Rodriguez was on the panel, an African-American lawyer whose name I can't remember now, but was at a very high level, an Asian-American man who was a vice president at one of the studios. And I talked to Paul Rodriguez on the phone in anticipation of moderating this panel in Las Vegas, of all places. And Paul Rodriguez said to me, you know, I've gone to all these parties with these Hollywood producers, and I keep saying, wow, how come you're not hiring any of us to make any of these films, you know? Like, we're here, you know, some of us know how to do this. And he said, I see you, Paul, and I see my landscaper. I see my gardener. I'm not going to give my gardener $3, $4, $5 million to make a film. He said, that's the reality of Hollywood. And the other person who was there was the Wayans guy. What is his name? What's his name? Damon, el otro. Is it Damon, the one who did In Living Color? Yeah, so the one who did In Living Color was there. He was the only one. The African-American lawyer, no dijo nada. He was just like, you know, talked up a storm to me, but when it came to, we were in this conference, he didn't say a word. Paul Rodriguez didn't show up. And then this guy Wayans was the only one that said, you know, it's because of racism. They see us and they think we're, you know, we don't have intelligence, we don't have the capacity to be able to handle the crews, the budgets, etc. He said, and that's the biggest issue. So those stereotypes that we talked about, that all we've lived with all of our lives, those stereotypes permeated people's consciousness to such an extent that people would look at us and say, you don't have the capacity to do this work. It's so complicated to make a film that we don't trust that you can do this. So I think part of that reality is still in existence. Now, it's been up to groups like the National Media Coalition and NALIP and other organizations that have been really actively pushing and beating down those doors so that we have more folks. And we do have more folks. If you look at the credits, and I spend time looking at the credits because I want to know if they're there. You know, I put a lot of energy into making NALIP, so I want to make sure that some of that energy paid off. And there's many more people now that are working in the industry. There's many more people who decided they don't want to work in the industry, and they're really working in web. So one person who I wish was here, actually, so she could talk about this, is Sonia Gonzalez Martinez. And so Sonia has been involved in media for many years as an editor, but she decided that she was tired of waiting for people to give her money to do long-form documentaries, and she's always loved comedy, and so now she's been doing a web series. I think the name of her company is TNA, which is Tits and Ass. So very irreverent. And, you know, she's been working with this actor and a comedian, and she has her own web series. And now she's having conversations with HBO to be able to actually expand the web series onto HBO. So people are doing really interesting things. We don't hear about it so much. We hear about the big blockbuster because the nature of the industry has changed so dramatically that now it's the sequel, it's the blockbuster, it's, you know, the movies that are action that you don't really have to understand the dialogue, so they can play in China, they can play all over the world because it's about the action, it isn't necessarily about the dialogue. So the small smaller films, which are the films that a lot of us appreciate, are those films that are really character-driven, that are very rich and textured in their dialogue. Those films are never going to be seen across the world because it's too much about you having a critical engagement with the media. And most of these blockbusters, it's not critical engagement. It's suspend belief, and somebody falls from 20 stories and they don't break a bone, and you hit yourself against the table and you have the biggest bruise and you can't walk for like 3 hours, right? So it's about suspending belief. The majority of us aren't really interested in these blockbuster kinds of things. So I think it's a combination of those stereotypes and the direction that the industry is moving, including television, because Netflix and all of these other entities are starting to again radically alter the entire media landscape. So that's my 2 cents.
That's about $3 worth, honey. I think building off of it, the business changes all the time. And no matter how much you learn and grow, I mean, I started as a secretary at CPB, a secretary at Realidades, became an associate producer and a producer, then I had my own series, then I became an executive producer, blah, blah, blah. Eventually I went independent so I could produce Mi Puerto Rico, which was a documentary about Puerto Rico-U.S. relations, and I knew if I did it at GBH, it wasn't going to happen, right? But the other thing is that it's also always a political job. The political work never stops, it never ends. And some of us get tired, like 2 of us just recently talked about being retired, right? So it doesn't mean we stop living and working, we're just not in the mainstream anymore. But the business changes all the time. So for example, I never had enough money to buy distribution for Mi Puerto Rico on HBO so that everybody could see it. We could only afford educational distribution. Well, eventually somebody saw it on YouTube. And they said, oh, you should get it off YouTube, you should get it off YouTube. And I finally decided to leave it there. You know why? Because more people will see it on YouTube than they will ever see it in broadcast. I'm not making any money from it, but people will see it, and the purpose was for it to be seen. So every time you think that you're getting somewhere with it, the business changes. So at age 63, I had to close down my independent business. I was doing educational videos that taught Spanish and English as second languages, and then math and other subjects, right? And so then where do I begin? So I said, well, I got to get a job. So I retooled myself. I went to school for like 3 months to, repackage and reframe and do all that stuff. And nobody would hire me because I had never done a website. I said, but there's nothing on a website that isn't in a video or a documentary or a radio program or an educational video in a museum or in a taller or whatever it is. And they wouldn't hire me. And after 18 months of looking, I had to find something else. So I ended up at FEMA, of all places. No regrets. I learned a great deal about emergency management. But the point is that it was a combination of, I'm 63, my last name is Ortiz, and I'm never going to change it. And I didn't know how to do that thing, right? I understood eventually that the reason for that was because they didn't know how to do it either, so they had to have somebody who had experience. But that was hindsight, okay? And now it's so diversified, which is what Lillian was talking about, that getting in, no matter where you want to get in, is easier in some ways because the equipment is lighter and it's heavier and it's more accessible and it's less expensive, but it's still tough. It's easy to make it, but you still can't get it released. So there's always a new, a new avenue, a new crossroads, where you got to go this way and go that way and keep learning and keep growing. And some of us are tired, right? And it's a business, and all they care about is the bottom line. And if we can help them with the bottom line and sell our souls, they're happy. If we don't want to sell our souls, which most of us don't want to, then they're not happy and we don't get in.
Yeah. Well, actually, he wants to speak.
How do you see the nonprofit world, the funders world, the foundations building future generations to carry on all the very legacies that you have established?
So I want to say two things about...
Here, you go first.
I want to say two things about, because I think it's really important the context within which we situate things. When Realidades was getting started, we were part of a movement. There were movements out there across the United States. There were political movements, there were ideologies, and some of us were really caught up in those movements, right? So, you know, people say now, oh, why aren't people doing things now? And I'm like, there's no movement. Hello? You know, you have to look at the historical period, and you have to be able to see, if I didn't want to join one group, you know, before I joined the Comité, I was thinking about joining the Lords, and then I didn't like the Lords, so then I was thinking about joining PRSU, but I looked at PRSU, and they look so much like the Lords, I said, I'm not going to join the PRSU, I'm going to join the Comité, they seem more humane, right? But there were movements, and there were choices that you could make around who you were going to do work with, and the way that you did that work, right? So there's that. I think the reality is that the funding situation has changed so dramatically now. I was a funder for 10 years. I worked with the first film fund, which was the first national funding entity that supported organizing films, progressive films. I knew everybody in the country because we were the only place to go to. The funding situation has changed so dramatically, and the cost, even though the equipment is incredibly lightweight, if you want to produce for television, and you want it ultimately to be seen on television, there are technical requirements that you need to meet that cost a lot of money. And so you have to raise a lot of money. The other thing is that when we were back making films, you know, hokey dokey films back in the day, you could make a film on a limited budget because you would call in chips. I worked for you one time, you worked for me, now I'm going to call in a favor. You know, would you do the camera? Would you do the sound? You know, I was hustling doing, when we did the Richie film, so Richie Perez died, we did the film. We didn't pay anybody because we were calling in favors all the time. I got the sound for free, I got the camera for free. But again, it was part of people who had some kind of consciousness. I think it's a different reality now. I think the young people, which I'm not a part of. I'm not a part of that whole young folks who are making these beautiful, wonderful digital pieces. But the funding situation has changed so dramatically, and the cost of making media is very expensive. The cost of getting it distributed and seen, because you have to market it. It isn't just about you make it and it's there. You have to market it or else nobody sees it, because there's a glut. There's a glut of content. If you go and you look at, you know, on demand or something, you see all these horrible, disgusting, terrible movies, right? And the only movies that get seen are the ones that have massive budgets for marketing. So the cost of being able to get your material out there into the world to be seen, unless you put it up on YouTube. So my film is distributed by Women Make Movies. And this guy in Puerto Rico said to me, I want to do something about Antonia Pantoja in Puerto Rico. So can I see the film? Yeah, I'll send you the film for free, not a problem. Right? My first thing was like, go buy the film, you know, I'm tired of subsidizing people. And so I sent him the film, and then he said, why don't you put it on YouTube? And I was like, the distributor will kill me if I put it on YouTube. And then I thought, you know what? I don't own the rights anymore to most of the archival footage. You know, I spent almost $25,000 in archival footage. Hello, that's a lot of money. So I don't own the rights to the footage anymore because I got 5 years here, 10 years there, you know, in perpetuity for something else. I'm going to put it on YouTube because I want people to see it. So it's not, I don't care now about the distributor. She wants to pull it, she can pull it. But I want the film to be seen. So I think the funding situation has changed, and everybody looks at the big funders. Thank goodness we have some really interesting people. So for instance, at the Ford Foundation, Cara Mertes came up through the ranks in public television, and she's now running their big media division. So she's very conscious of the small filmmakers and the grassroots filmmakers, and so people are getting some money, people are getting substantial money, but the funding situation has changed.
Sorry. Just on the point of the funding and your question, here's a perfect example. Mi Puerto Rico cost $700,000. Now we're talking a 20-year-old film, right? But the way they funded then is the way they fund now. They fund you poquito a poquito poquito. And the assumption is that they give you the money to do everything and hire other people and buy the equipment and do the research and write the script and all that stuff, but you as the producer can't take a salary. So you have to work someplace else so that you can support yourself while you're making your film, right? So if they gave you all of the money for production in the beginning, it would cost less money. And then if they gave you all the money for editing, it would cost less money, but they don't. They give it to you in little bits, in part because they want to parcel out as much as they can to as many people as they can, but by the same token, they want to keep the reins on you tight. So it doubles the cost of a film. So of course you can't afford to get distribution rights and things like that. But the philosophy of funding, and I was reading this very interesting book by a gentleman whose name I forget, but it's Realidades, and he talks about philanthropy in the country nowadays. And philanthropy is now more and more attached to, quote, what we call the meritocracy, which is the new money. Okay? And all they care about is making money. They don't have the philosophy of that you always, put away 10% of whatever you get for the future, and you don't spend your capital, and, you invest in community in one fashion or another. So they don't want to invest in independent voices because independent voices challenge them. Right? So it's the same thing all over again, but in a different, in a different glass and a different color. And it's a never-ending battle.
Can I just say one last thing? Because I'm actually reading for a funder right now. After I left the field, they called me. When they heard I retired, they called me, "You're a good reader. Why don't you read for us?" So I'm looking at a lot of the funding sources. And what I'm noticing, and actually when I was with Chica Luna, which was that organization that was right here on 106 in Lexington, for women of color to make narrative films, the funding situation had changed so much. So a lot of women who had gotten into the financial industry had pulled out, and they had pulled out their money, and they started, these were young, mostly white women. Well, I think all of them were white women. And so they formed, these various production companies that would support different folks in the field. And so now you have all of these funds that are really populated by white women of earned wealth, not inherited wealth. I worked with people who had inherited wealth. These people have earned their wealth, and they band together, and they will then support, startups. So some of these organizations will support startups, like you're just starting up, and you have a little bit of money, but you haven't really raised the first money, which is what everybody's looking for. Then they will support you. Other folks will support you for distribution. So again, it's about the changing landscape even of media funding. And most people are looking for the big dollars because of the cost. And, the young people who are coming out of film school want to make the big films so that they become, well known, and then it gets easier for them to be able to raise these massive amounts of money. But the landscape for funding is changing dramatically as well. And so keeping up with that is just amazing. So when I read people are going to these funders, I'm like, holy cow, these funders didn't exist when I was doing my stuff.
All right, I just want to come back to SB's starting point, which is, we did all of this, all these organizations, we're still, same struggle, same fight, right? But when it comes to media, the other different context is there's been massive media consolidation. Yes. When you talk about media now, you're talking about Murdoch, right? You're talking about billionaires, who are determining what's produced, how stories are told, who are actually electing presidents, right? Because Donald Trump doesn't get elected other than by fan clubs. It's really fans that he has. He's really a media production, right? I mean, we're in a whole other ball game, and media owners, because we're still talking, we're talking about whatever, it's this stage of capitalism, right? So the most powerful people in the world own and control media. It's a lot harder, to break in, you want to tell your little story. We're talking about the people who rule the world, right? So that's what we're talking about. That's why the planet is in the danger that it's in, right? Because it's the fossil fuel industry, okay? So basically in power. So that's what, something like what these young folks have done, right? That kind of internet network, which reaches millions also, is that's the counter narrative of today, You know, that's where the different stories are told. That's where you don't need to raise a lot of money, but these people aren't making money. You know, it's kind of media as a weapon. And that's how Realidades was about, media as a weapon. I mean, that's still what it's about. You know, we tell our own stories as a weapon. But we're up against, and this is not just in media. I mean, I think across the board, I mean, we know this, right? The environment and every kind of aspect of life, you know, we're up against, you know, I mean, hopefully it's the last gasp of, at some point, of capitalism, because it's either the planet or capitalism, and you can't have both. You know, so the fight is big. I mean, I'm just saying the fight is big, you know, but I think that if Puerto Rico right now proves anything, it's like that's what it's going to take to win the fight, you know, is the millions of us, like, you know, not just being unhappy about the situation, but actually, you know, taking to the streets, you know. So, and because I was wondering, right, if it's over 500,000 marched in Puerto Rico, wow, what would be the equivalent millions that would have to march in the U.S. to begin to undo, you know, it, yeah, you know, so.
I just want to say one thing. I ran into this, it's the CNN business, and they have a group, here. It's called the Puerto Rican Center for Investigative Journalism. Huh? Yes. And so this is young people. People can look at the pictures. They're all very young. And what is the same from during the time of Realidades is that the push came from young people who created the action committee, right? And for this to happen is because at that point it was just as gatitas, con unos cuantos gatitos, okay? However, this is happening worldwide, where all these young folks are creating their own media center. And they are making sure that it's in the media at white. I mean, these are all Puerto Ricans, but I'm sure in other places it's the same thing. So we see the outcome, right? Because I'm not a tweeter person, but that's where they did most of their work. Right? And then there was the support on Facebook, and there's one more media thing that they're doing, Instagram. Okay, it's a lot of work, but the work is being done collectively in groups, right? One of the real issues for me in media work is that it gets very individualized, right? And they're breaking with con ese esquema, right? They're breaking with that it has to be individualized and doing it collective. So, I mean, I think it's a great and wonderful moment, as it was a great, wonderful moment when the Realidades was creation, and Lillian talked about that there's a movement, you know, and the arts get moved forward, get propelled when there's a movement. And in this case, media arts, but all the arts, you know, so that the wonderful exhibit of the posters came out because they were a movement, right? That's right. They propelled folks to doing that work. And we organize 24/7, and that's what's going on.
But so here's the other piece of it. There's making the content, whether it's painting or it's writing or it's a film or it's a video or whatever it is, and then it's getting it through whatever system there is, and nowadays there are more easier ways to get it through the system. But one of the things that we did at the National Media Coalition was that we started working on getting people into the Directors Guild, into the Writers Guild, into the Producers Guild, into all of the television stations. We had a study within public broadcasting that looked at minorities in public broadcasting, and I was one of 24 members from across the country. And we did a study. So that then we came up with recommendations for public television. What is a Latino program? What is a minority program? How many producers does it have? Who tells the story? And it's usually the producer, the director, etc. And if you didn't have at least 2 of those 3, it wasn't a minority project. And then we headed towards, we have to get people on the board of the television stations and of the radio stations and of the newspapers. So we stop when we finish doing our product. And that's not where we stop. We have to think that you have to get breaking the gatekeepers. You have to get through the gates. And that means you have to learn how to be on a board, right? So I did, and I served on 3 boards. And I'm not the only one here who's done that. And it's happening at the grassroots level again. And they will come up against, God willing, right? They will come up against, oh, wait a minute, they're not talking to me, they're not listening to me, they're not hearing me, so I'm going to force them to hear me. I'm going to get somebody to get on that board. We have to be at the top level and in the middle level, not just at the grassroots level. That's my answer to all of it, whether it's a foundation or a newspaper or a television station or whatever. Y me voy a callar.
Just to fill in on the Centro de Periodismo Investigativo, right, CPI, which is a non-profit, right, news organization in Puerto Rico that has been doing in-depth coverage of what's been going on in Puerto Rico in all aspects, including at the corruption level, the political level. They're the ones that release the 800 chat transcripts, right, that brought all those people to the streets. So just to, media is absolutely critical, and it's, frankly, incredible things are happening really in the nonprofit arena, which is still relying on donors and funders or whatever, which is, but the fact of the matter is that it's still about, as Lillian said, media feeding, like actually providing the ammunition, the food, for a movement, because people need to be informed, because people need to, they know that they're miserable, they need to understand what's creating that misery, that analysis, right? So it's absolutely, and there's a lot of those consortiums here, by the way, in the US. There's a lot of those kind of consortiums, media consortiums, there's ProPublica, there's a whole bunch of them. It's all, they don't, no print, they don't produce anything, it's all online, and you better have the patience to read long investigative pieces. But that's what's required too, to understand the complexity, of where we are. Mark October 29th, we've invited CPI to come to Hunter to give them an award, for the work that they've done, the Aronson Awards. So on October 29th at Hunter, we'll be putting that out.
Yay. Good. Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience that we could entertain? There you go.
Okay. Hello, folks. I'd like to go back. On my Sundays, I often started with the shows during my later high school and college days with the show Like It Is with Gil Noble. So I'm wondering if during that time, those are the early days of Realidades, right? And I often sort of early on saw it similar to Like It Is, or that's the Like It Is of the Latino community. So I'd like to know how much influence, if anything, that show had on the development of Realidades.
I never missed Like It Is, by the way. I love that guy. He was our hero.
Yeah, well, there were shows on 13, which you mentioned before. What was it?
51st State.
The 51st State was one, that preceded Realidades, and I think there was another one with the it was like just a black entertainment cultural program. That was the 51st. I think there was another one though.
There was Soul.
Islip. What's it? Islip. Something Islip. Islip.
He had Ellis Hazlip was the first, I think, African American to be at Channel 13 and in public broadcasting, and he started a series called Soul, which had a lot of cultural stuff from a black frame of reference and perspective. Then came Tony Brown, who did the Tony Brown Journal, which was journalism. Then came the 51st State, and the 51st State was trying to sort of be broader in its community inclusiveness, so to speak, and it was doing news that was the small news, not the big news that you saw on regular television, but all the really local nitty-gritty stuff, you know. I remember that they did a piece on a guy who made art from garbage and went around the streets picking up garbage, and he recycled, you know, shoes and newspapers and pieces of wood, and he did all kinds of stuff like that. So they did the tune of the different drummer, right? And then came Realidades. I don't know if Like It Is had an effect on us, but Humberto would be the one who would know, if he remembers.
Humberto doesn't remember anything except...
Unless you cue him.
Except that Jose Garcia did something for the 51st State. He did a film called La Carreta. And it was when, and then he learned how to turn the mic to where he could hear. And he came with his story because they didn't want to air it. They, you know, he had done it for the 51st State, but they didn't want to broadcast it. And he came to Community News Service, which I was the director of, and I sent 3 different reporters out at the same time to get different points of view about what was going on with the 51st State. One directly to the 51st State, another one to some folks out in different neighborhoods around the city to see what their understanding was about what the 51st State was supposed to be. And with all that feedback, we just kept sending out articles through Community News Service to all the press, and the press would sometimes refuse to publish it because they didn't want too much controversy, but occasionally they would publish some of the stories. And demonstrations. Besides running the 51st State, I was still always just a guy who was always on the street at whatever demonstration was going on. And so I was at a demonstration at Channel 13 while my staff was reporting to the Community News Service activities at Channel 13 regarding demonstrations and all these community activists that were breaking into the studio. And when I got back from the demonstration, there was a note on my desk at the Community News Service that somebody at Channel 13 wanted to talk to Community News Service because they were seeing us as the source of all the news that was coming out about people demonstrating. And so they were looking for somebody. They were looking for us to do a strong story about how great Channel 13 was, because they were the only ones who had a program such as the 51st State that was looking into the inner city communities, which was true, but they were not seeing all of the inner city communities until Jose Garcia did his film called La Carreta, because he did it for the 51st State. In any case, the point is that the next day after this guy came to my office, I went to Channel 13 with my resume in hand and said, "Oh, I understand you guys are interested in the news that we're producing at the 51st about the 51st State and this being a community-based television program." And they said, "Oh yeah, we're talking to this guy named Humberto Cintron." And I said, "Oh, well, that's exactly what I came here for. Here's my resume. Thank you." and they hired me.
And Realidades was born.
And Realidades was born because the first thing I did was I took La Carreta, made a big issue of it because Jose had done a great film. And we said, you know what? There's a lot of other Puerto Ricans in this town besides Rafael Hernandez. What was the guy who wrote La Carreta? René Marquez. Yes, René Marquez. I said, you know, there's Puerto Ricans all over the place writing stories and making films. Jose Garcia is a best example because they did this for the 51st state. But they wouldn't hire Jose Garcia. They said, well, you know, we're interested in this fellow that we understand is running the community news service. His name is Humberto Cintron. So I said, yo, yeah, I wonder if that guy. Dropped my resume, and I was hired by the next day. So that's just a little story about how it began.
Anything else? Any other questions?
Comments?
Yeah.
It's more of two comments I'd like to make. I don't remember the years, but I remember back, I worked along with Carla Pinza, and she had a television program called Puerto Rican New Yorker, where she interviewed various people from the community, and I photographed this. So if anybody remembers the time when James Olmos was here at the Winter Garden to do Zoot Suit, that's when the show was on the air. At this moment, I don't remember the year, but I see. So I'd like to mention that because, again, there was no other Puerto Rican on television doing anything. The other thing I'd like to mention is that myself, along with Frank Algarin, who's here, were one of the last graduating classes at the Channel 13 Filmmaking and Television Production. So I'm a graduate, and I had the opportunity also to meet all of you. I have to say that my experience with the training school tied into my connection with Realidades has been a great influence in my life as a photographer. I went into documentary photography. But the important thing is, it is my honor to have met all of you who have been groundbreakers in our community, and that you have influenced me in my life as an individual, as an activist, and as a photographer. And I thank you.
That's great.